Well, the best way to start a discussion like this is first with an introduction and a little background about yourself. So can you say, we just go through, we'll start here and move over, who you are, what it is your company does, and then especially how AI is integrated into the marketing and customer acquisition process.
Sure. I'd be happy to start. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jonathan Yoon, and I'm responsible for marketing and customer experience at Nationwide Life Insurance. I've been with Nationwide for about 10 years, about 25 years total in financial services across both sides of the Pacific in US and Asia. Nationwide is some of you may recognize Nationwide for the On Your Side jingle. Can we do a quick raise of hands if you recognize the jingle?
Yeah,
Thank you. Not too shabby, not too shabby. As a brand manager, I need to ask this question, but well, thank you for your interest and engagement with our brand. But Nationwide is about a 100-year-old brand. It's a Fortune 100 company, and it's listed as ranked as number 7 in the life insurance industry in the US. We distribute our products from both B2B as well as B2C. With B2B being about 90% of the business, so we distribute our products through financial advisors with Morgan Stanley's of the world, Edward Jones of the world, as well as independent life insurance agents. In B2C, we have online presence, which I'll talk about a little bit, and we also have salaried folks on the phone who help individuals who would like to engage that way. From an AI perspective, we've been working with our enterprise analytics office to develop traditional machine learning models to improve and enhance underwriting as well as customer experience. And we're expanding that across different value chains across the life insurance operations because there's a lot of use cases there as well. Really happy to have a discussion around how we can use AI to do more of what we've been traditionally doing. Great.
My name is Spence. I'm the CEO of Lilt, which is the most advanced AI solution for enterprise language. So if you go to intel.com and change it into another language, or you use Snapchat in another language, or you buy a shoe on asics.com in another language, that's all AI-generated text that we did. We don't acquire customers directly using AI. We enable our customers to do that when they're operating globally. This company started at the Stanford AI Lab, where I was a PhD student in computer science.
Nice.
I'm Bryce Macher. I'm Vice President of Recommendations and Personalization Science at NBC Universal, which is part of a machine learning and data science organization. My purview is all of the customer-facing data science and machine learning across the platform. We're an organization that is very data-centric. It's global. Our user bases come from across multiple apps and NBC audiences, from what you know as NBC to Peacock to Showmax to Sky in the UK and Fandango in the US. There are a lot of different IP properties in the NBC universe that we power personalization behind. My team is one that has really focused on productionalizing and operationalizing deep learning with attention to balancing the business use cases and the business scale. One of the key tenets of our team has always been that you can't scale a money pit, so we are very focused on the end results of that deep learning because it can quickly become a planet-consuming money pit. My focus prior to that has always been linguistics. I have a PhD in computational linguistics, computational anthropological linguistics, and my background bounces back and forth between using language models and recommendation models for customer acquisition. So that's me.
Yeah, somehow I feel like money pits do scale pretty well, just backwards in reverse. But
you shouldn't want to scale it.
They shouldn't want to, that's true. Okay, thank you.
All right, I'm Kyle Thomas. I'm Chief Scientist and co-founder of MotiveMetrics. Broadly speaking, what we do at MotiveMetrics is improve marketing communications. My background, I have a PhD in experimental psychology. Early stage, what we did was, in my PhD, we did a whole lot of research on using AI to basically scrape text and use text to understand consumer motivations. So, for example, taking someone's social media feed and being able to back out what types of messaging might be appealing to them. More recently, we've been focused specifically on paid search in terms of sort of how to do this. There we use a plus AI model, both involving people in the loop as well as the AI, and we'll talk a little bit about that, basically solving the sort of last mile problem that the AI systems tend to have in personalization. And we work with B2C customers, we work with B2B, we work with some agencies. And broadly speaking, we use AI both to understand the sort of customer intent and then be able to generate marketing that's actually tailored to that for obviously better business results, so it's not another money pit.
Yeah, that's interesting to think of it as a last mile problem in the sense that you have to customize that message for the consumer at the very end of the trail. Okay, so I've got a new question for you guys. Can you each start thinking in your head about a specific example where you could tell it as a story of how AI has contributed to acquiring a new customer for your organization? And I'd love to hear sort of the nitty-gritty details, some elaboration on what it is that you kind of took from it, the insight. So, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. So, like I said, there's a lot of use cases for AI to enhance the life insurance buying process. So, so first one, I'll give two specific examples, one with B2C, and then I'll go to B2B. B2C, so AI, machine learning has made the life insurance buying process really, really easy, and it really shortened the time for that process. So if there's someone in the audience that have gone through a life insurance buying process about 10 years ago, the typical process took about 4 to 6 weeks, I would say. And as soon as you submitted your application, you will see someone show up at your house, and that person would want to collect your blood, collect your fluids, poke a needle in your arm, and it's just not been a great experience. It's been pretty invasive, and you would have to go through a lot of paper back and forth, submitting your medical history documentation from your doctor. There's just a lot of back and forth, and that's typically what life insurance buying process looked like between about 4 to 6 weeks. Now, within recent years, we've really made an innovative progress through what we call accelerated underwriting or no medical exam underwriting, where none of that is necessary. No blood, no fluid. But what we've done is we've connected the pipes from third-party vendors to be able to have a good understanding of the applicant without having to go through all that process. And so with that, we've been able to shorten the time to do the underwriting in about 15 minutes. So think about that. 4 to 6 weeks, shortened to about 15 minutes. So think about the customer experience and think about the buying process that's been really enabled by leaning into machine learning and AI. And we've been able to do that also completely online. So no need to talk to an agent, no need to talk to someone. You can do that 100% end-to-end online in a matter of 15 minutes. So if you're interested, you can just Google Nationwide Life Essentials, and it's a term life product that you can check it out. Just literally takes less than 15 minutes for you to get a code and also get an application.
Nice, yeah, just let AI sort through all of that for you, summarize and decide. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, I'll give an example of one of our customers. So ASICS is one of our customers. So like I said, if you buy a shoe on asics.com in German, that's AI generated. And translation is an interesting enterprise use case in that for most global businesses, it's already something they spend a lot of money on. It's a professional services category. So historically, you hire an agency and they hire people and they'll translate shoe descriptions for you. You can replace this almost entirely with AI today. And the reason that one would want to do that, you'd maybe want to do that for cost optimization, but you'd also want to do it for reach purposes. So most businesses only operate in a few languages on the internet. And I think for most of us who speak English, we don't think about that very much. But there are about 6 billion people in the world that don't speak English. Mm-hmm. And you can do like a simple thought experiment on this. You just pick a less commonly spoken language like Urdu. Do we have any Urdu speakers here?
Any Urdu speakers?
We got one.
Yeah.
All right, we have one. So now imagine that the
yeah.
entire internet was written in Urdu. And how excited would you be to spend money on that version of the internet? And so it's well established that conversion rates are higher when people can research products themselves, read about products themselves. And so that's the real opportunity for businesses, I think, is to truly personalize the internet to everybody who uses it.
Yeah, just a quick side question. So I can imagine how much more efficient it is going from 4 weeks to 15 minutes, but do you think that just language is the biggest opportunity, the billions of people that are disconnected from most people's businesses?
Do I?
Basically, is that the number one opportunity, do you think, out there? To translate into new languages and acquire new customers from different languages?
For using translation, do you mean?
Well, I just meant for most people who want to acquire a customer.
Well, I think there are lots of different avenues for customer acquisition. I think it really depends on if you're trying to, international expansion is one of your goals, then operating in those markets, like translation is a component of that.
Gotcha. Okay. So, thank you.
I think from my side, thinking about the acquisition funnel, you have the top of funnel, the tofu, which is kind of your kind of awareness, you've got interest, and then hopefully you get to that bottom of the funnel where people engage in a growth framework. And Spence makes the funnel available to everybody. And then one of the things that I find fascinating, and I think Kyle too, is that top of funnel where we call it a cold start problem. We don't really know anything about users. We might not know anything about a piece of content. We got to somehow match these two things together. In content recommendations, this problem's been solved okay in some ways, right? It's the classic onboarding survey that you get 1% of people to fill out and everybody tries to skip or they bail completely from your service and never come back. One of the interesting ways that we've started to actually solve that is by looking at the history of linear television. Like, how did linear TV figure out with one time slot at 6 p.m. what you slide in there? And the kind of romanticized version of it is you had these guys in a room with their smoking jackets and they're hanging out and they just go, that one's good. And you're like, wow, this guy's a genius. When in fact, there's just a lot of statisticians sitting around crunching a ton of numbers from different markets, trying to figure out what do we put at 6 p.m. to have the widest breadth of reach being the classic metric of how many eyeballs or how many household eyeballs are tuned into a thing that sends a signal, electrical signal, or pulls an electrical signal that you can measure from a Nielsen or any other kind of radio research approach. And so that's kind of how we've started to think about that problem at different institutions that I've been at, Discovery, CNN, NBCU, Warner Brothers, is how do we get that top of funnel? How do we actually know something about someone who's just interested that we haven't had an exchange with? Because that is really the place where there's so much unsung growth opportunity, is if you can really attach to someone and say, hey, this brand is for you. We've got content that I know you're gonna love that you probably haven't even heard of. We have content and IP that most people who work at NBC don't even know that we have. So we're guaranteed to have something for you. The biggest opportunity for personalization and recommendations is to get that in front of you at the interest stage, not at the engagement stage. And so that's one of the problems around growth and personalization and acquisition that we spend a lot of time thinking about.
And do you have a vision for how far you're going to take that in the next, say, 12 or 24 months?
Billions of dollars. No, it's one of these things. It's a classic problem in any industry. It's A/B test. It's A/B test after A/B test after A/B test. The challenge with the top of the funnel A/B test, though, is that you don't really know what your control is. This is a thing that marketing has always dealt with. We tried regional controls, but we all know that that's not really, we're just lying to ourselves most of the time when we do that. And so it's really about testing these new tools that are coming out. Google is trying to streamline its pipeline and its cookies and some of the way it serves ads. And so those are the challenges for how we're going to have to, those are challenges we're going to have to encounter as we try to get there. And the landscape changes so quickly that it's hard to say in 24 months, I'm going to do X and I'm going to solve the top of the funnel.
Okay, thanks. So do you have a customer story you can share with us?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about a large online review site, and it was a B2B initiative that we kicked off this year. And what they're trying to do is just get more business customers. And the basic problem that you face in digital marketing for anything of scale is once you get above, I don't know, a few dozen sort of market segments, target audiences, it's something that humans can't really deal with. And so the first step is we're using AI to understand what are all the customer segments, what customer segments are currently working. Are there adjacent customer segments that we can also target, right, that have similarities that fall under the umbrella of sort of customers that they would want? And then the last piece is, how do you then, once you have sort of the landscape of all these segments, hundreds, thousands, in this case, I think it was like hundreds of thousands, how do you actually then customize the content for all of those, right? So that it's not just some generic message blasted out to all of them. And in this case, the details I'm talking in the abstract of, where it applies to sort of everything. Here in paid search, it's a lot of, keywords and ads and all these other pieces that you need to put together, but it's all basically understanding words and sort of how you map words to the psychology behind them, and then map words to sort of the triggers that you can latch on to. And in this effort, actually it's pretty good. It was, I think, increased something like 65% more customers than they were getting already. And because it was more efficiently acquiring these customers, the customer acquisition cost drop, it was something like $500,000 in cost savings over Q1 and Q2 this year. So sort of straightforward application in digital marketing where a lot of it's just based on words, and your signals are words, your output is words, and so you can imagine LLMs fit on the output side, and then there's other sort of NLP models that you're using on the front end to understand what do you want those things to generate in the first place for which audiences.
Nice. Okay, so the next question is going to be about hurdles that you've overcome, challenges that you've had, and I know you talked about how going from four weeks to 15 minutes is big, but is there another sort of challenge that you dealt with with insurance?
Yeah, so happy to share, maybe hear more of a B2B perspective, but in general, life insurance companies deal with very sensitive data, right? These are customer data. A lot of these are like medical records. So data privacy, data security is of utmost importance. And availability and quality is also sometimes challenging as well, because we're not always able to have quality data. The other aspect of our industry, it's a heavily regulated industry. So any AI model that we build must adhere to strict standards, guidelines from the regulator. But in terms of activating on AI and using these models to grow business and acquire customers, I think one of the biggest hurdle is just in general, just lack of trust in a machine-generated opportunity from a lot of our distributors. So if you think about the typical financial advisor or insurance agent, a lot of the successful ones have built their business based on relationship, right? They know the customer really well, they know their families, and that's how they've built their book of business over the years. And I remember one instance where we built a kind of like a recommender system to help these financial advisors to do cross-sell and upsell. So the idea is we reached out to advisors and asked them to submit their book of business, whether it's 1,000 or 5,000, whatever it might be. And a lot of them were like investment clients, customers that trusted them with their investments, whether it's retirement or whatever it might be. And we're trying to help them uncover opportunities to help them with their life insurance needs. And so what we did was we ranked all of their customer base based on their recommender score, based on how much they might be willing to purchase life insurance on top of their existing book of business, or rather business. And so it made a lot of sense. We had product recommendations and we scored them, but there was just real lack of adoption because of the lack of trust in a machine-generated opportunity. And one of the ways that we were able to overcome that was to start small. And just have an expectation that any change in process could take up to 18 months to have that enough adoption.
Oh, so slow. Yeah, you'd have to think that way, just from the bottom up.
Yeah.
Hurdles?
Yeah, I think I'll speak again about our customers. I think what's interesting is my co-founder and I met working on Google Translate about 10 years ago, and I think that you could make the argument Google Translate was like the first broadly used generative maybe AI system broadly, but certainly NLP system. And for most of the last 10 years, customers have been really hesitant to use a system like that for an enterprise use case that's customer facing. And that seems to have just radically changed in the last 6 or 7 months. And so I think internally, for whatever reason or psychologically, the real barrier was self-imposed, which was like fear of the risk of using a system like this, even though like GPT-4 is not as competitive a translation system as Google Translate, but now suddenly everybody's like using GPT-4 for translation. And so I think that's really opened up opportunities for use cases where people just perceived risk that actually wasn't really there, and to apply it to a problem that is highly amenable to using an AI system.
we're actually not too far off from the same problem in media, right? Because historically, a page was programmed by an editorial team that imagined themselves as curators of something.
I see, right.
And so there's a lot of hesitancy to give that up to the machines, right? Like, how am I going to make sure that the right content is curated? There's also legal elements of this too in content where you agree to a house, a production house. You might say, hey, look, I'm going to put Mario Brothers in every single #1 slot for 2 weeks. And that's just how it is. So you have to build a system that you can trust that will recommend and personalize everything except for the 2 slots on every row so that you meet your contractual obligations. That's not a thing. It's just an illustrative example. Nobody would do that. But that's one of the big challenges in media for recommendations is that as we see the success of places like Netflix and Hulu and some of these tech-forward media companies, Apple, the traditional media companies are playing catch-up because we're trying to figure out how do you capture the magic of an editorial team. Like, there's truly something there that is magical. And accentuate that, remove the mundanity by using some of these machine learning powered systems. One great example of that is if you watched anything on Peacock last year, about the time that Jurassic Park came out, each of the dinosaurs had their own curated menus. Dinosaurs were, telling you what they would have watched. And it was really interesting. It was smart. It was funny. And that's the magic of an editorial team. Stop programming a trending rail and let me do the math for you based on some kind of standard calculation and focus on making me some great dinosaur rails. That's the challenge we need to get to in the media industry because that's where differentiation is actually going to start to come from as production budgets change and as these services have to compete for what is essentially a limited number of hours in a week.
Nice, thanks.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's shared themes, obviously, that sort of cut across. So the biggest challenges that we see, I tend to think of as like the last mile problem that I'd mentioned before, by analogy with the same struggles they've had in using AI for like long distance shipping, right? Where it's easy when you got the trucks on the freeway, but how do you get them to navigate through a city? That's a much more difficult problem. And in fact, that's a whole set of different problems, right? And that's exactly what we see is you can get the AI to get you probably 90%, maybe 95% of where you want to go. But we intentionally build our systems with a human in the loop to address some of these sort of last mile challenges. And some of them are sort of well known, like how dependable are your outputs, right? So people talk about, large language models hallucinating. Obviously, you don't want that with like false advertising, right? So you need some way to basically add some sort of layer of like human QA, human curation. That itself is a challenge, which is if you're going to do this at scale with AI where it's just so prolific, how do you then make that sort of human scale, how do you compress that back to human scale and make it human reviewable or sort of so that humans can even do anything with it? Another challenge is, as I mentioned, AI, you need it to get to the scale of dozens of audiences, but then on the other side, you often can get kind of generic content. And you guys could test this out today. If you have ChatGPT on your phone, ask it to write you ads for multiple different branded products, and it's going to come out basically the same, right? So how do you differentiate yourself in this environment? So you understand, you've got these different audiences. You've also got to take the brand into account. So you need some method for basically inputs to kind of get that stuff in there, right? So how do you even get it in there, right? You can't just plug it into ChatGPT. That's not exactly, gonna get you all the way there. And then the last major challenge that I think is interesting and has come, we sort of started off big picture. And as we started getting, building out more specific capabilities in paid search, as the example that I know best, there's a whole lot of extra infrastructure that you need, and this is true wherever you apply it, right? So you can't just say, oh, ChatGPT is going to make me ads for my account. How are you going to get the ads in there? How are you going to make sure they go to the right place in the account? How are you going to make sure that the way that we think of it, like the audiences are segmented across different ad groups or whatever? How do you actually implement the things that it's doing as an output? And that requires much more like classic digital infrastructure to do, right? It's not necessarily AI, but how do you get the AI outputs and inputs to then interface in a sort of deterministic way with any kind of system? And that turns out, at least in our case, it's relatively complex. And I think that's probably true across any digital marketing platform where it's easy from the outside in to kind of look and be like, oh, cool, yeah, we'll use GPT and this is going to be great. Immediately, if you had actually someone like the account manager running the account and you ask them to do it, it's not very easy to do, especially when you're dealing with thousands of audiences, hundreds of thousands of audiences. It's just incredibly difficult to actually implement a lot of this stuff. You need custom things sort of for each domain, I think would be the case.
So how do we get over that hurdle? Do you have to wait for the big tech companies to kind of solve that, or can we build stuff on top of it?
Which one?
Like to actually get to the point where you can manage these thousands of accounts across different platforms and.
So I mean, that's a lot of a lot of what we do. I tend to think of it as like it's like the AI is sort of the engine that runs it, but there's a whole scaffolding on top of that of like how you do the deployments, how it's going to tokenize different things so that they change in different places, and that's that's not even the AI. That's just like how do you actually implement this through the APIs.
That's interesting. My prediction was that your answer was going to be all about like the way you prompt inject and all these things, but yeah, it's a plumbing problem still.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, you might think like, oh, paid search, it's Google, they can just do this. Then why aren't, they aren't.
But it's still
Yeah,
complex.
so.
Okay, so the next question is going to be about generative AI. So it's becoming more mainstream. We, for this conversation, can kind of just imagine that it happens very rapidly in the next, say, 2 or 3 years. There's a big chunk of the internet generated. Lots of details on Amazon are generated. Lots of videos are generated. So coming from that perspective, how do you think it's going to influence customer acquisition? And starting with the medical field is interesting because we're obviously not going to be generating fake medical data to make predictions. So you can kind of take this question however you want. Maybe for you it's about filtering out to true data and making sure generative doesn't get into your models.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so generative AI, Gen AI, it seems like every day there's a meeting that has some element of Gen AI in that conversation. So as with any other companies or organizations, we're taking a look at that very closely. And I think it's to the point where it's creating a bit of a sense of fear among marketers in general, because most marketers see that as a bit of a threat in terms of some of those roles that we currently play in terms of copywriting and design and so forth. But I think there's a lot of use cases I'm really excited about, especially about the opportunity for marketers to be able to reach segments of the market that we haven't been able to do so, and do that in a way that's scalable. So we always talk about personalization at the scale, right? But we haven't really been able to do that in the past. But with this new way of reaching customers, I think we can do that. And from a life insurance perspective, I think there's a lot of opportunities to reach segments and overcome barriers that have prevented a lot of these people from having access to the right life insurance solutions that they could. And that could be a language. So Spence talked about how your company is helping to translate. So that's a real thing, right? Because many people in this country simply haven't been able to learn about the need for life insurance because of language barriers. And also seeing some educational material that really talks about some of those, that demystify some of those misconceptions that they might have about life insurance. So Gen AI can really help that, I think.
If there is a pie chart right now for how you're acquiring customers, what is the biggest 2 or 3 pieces? And do you see them getting smaller? Are you acquiring through television commercials or through Google advertisements or?
Yeah, I think a lot of that can be, so it's primarily through B2B. So it's primarily through advisors.
Oh, gotcha.
Advisors. So we could create materials in different languages. For example, last week I was in a meeting with a group of financial advisors, and the gentleman in the back was from Florida, and he talked about if we have materials in Haitian Creole. And I really sympathize with that person because I really want to help him reach their audience with language.
We can help with that.
Yeah. So, but in the current state, I'm not able to prioritize Haitian Creole because the sheer population is fairly small, and we have materials in Spanish, obviously, in Chinese, and probably the next language that we probably go to would be something like French or some of the more.
And also maybe explaining some of the details with insurance can be so complicated. It might be nice to just read something very simply that has filtered out the stuff I don't need and tells me what I need. So
exactly.
That kind of thing I can imagine too.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Generative AI.
What's the nature of the question again?
So just in the future where generative AI is everywhere, how does that affect the way you would be acquiring customers?
Yeah, I think I can speak for translation specifically and then more broadly. I think most companies don't do, like they do a lot of marketing in English or whatever their native language is, and then they don't even like run Google Ads or do content marketing in other languages. So I think it's an enabler in that regard, and we already see some of our customers doing that. They're doing something that they didn't do before because it was too operationally complicated or too expensive. I tend to think, and probably Bryce has an opinion on this, it's like you could imagine just this outpouring of content. Like anecdotally, I get a lot more outbound email than I used to, but it kind of sucks, and it's clearly written in this sort of robotic style that you get from ChatGPT, where it's like too well written. And,
right, perfect bullets everywhere.
Yeah, and the reasoning is like too well balanced. Like on the one hand, on the other hand, like you have to go to school for a long time to learn how to write that way.
It's like a real enthymeme.
Yeah, that's right. And so I think that it's really like AI plus people working, and then it's like the quality of the material that you're creating that really matters, and it's not just like full spray and pray content marketing hasn't worked for a long time, and I don't think it works better just because now you have this, nuclear weapon of content marketing that's a generative AI system.
A nuclear weapon of content marketing?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what you call ChatGPT?
Nice.
You can kind of see that. Okay, so Bryce, so I'm particularly curious about your answer for this. So I'm a YouTube content creator. I have a channel called Curious Future, and every single day I generate images with Midjourney. I take them over to Runway ML. I animate them all with AI, and even though it's a little crude, it has to be something that's on the mind of getting people to sign up for Peacock in the long run and all of these things. So how do you, will there be a lot of generative stuff to convert people, or does every show become customized, or how does generative fit into the future?
It makes a really weird recursive loop, right? Because you have content that's recursive unto itself being generated by these systems, right? It really reifies biases that are already out there.
Yeah.
And it's trying to maximize whatever it is you're trying to maximize, but mostly could this be created by a human, and is its objective function? And then I'm recommending stuff that could recommend this is something you would watch. So the something I encourage you to watch becomes the thing that was generated by AI. So the objective function eventually will change, right? It'll eat itself until it's like, is this mistakenly created by a human, created by AI that somebody would consume? And there we go on a really weird winding path. But I think, stepping back, I don't know that we would ever get there, because part of the problem with the machine-generated stuff is it works really good when you've got a close hand on it and it's a specified thing, like your animations and Midjourney images. But we know that a lot of the content that's generated by these systems just, they reify massive social biases. I think the most recent one I was reading about was the photo app that everybody was using on their iPhone to create professional headshots, and somebody was like, hey, make me prettier, and it lightened their skin. That's really messed up, because I know you don't have a censor button on the camera. And that's why we can't, it's gonna be really hard to go down that road, because we know that audiences for content are incredibly diverse. So what we would eventually do is eliminate those audiences, but we'd keep them in the recursive recommendation loop because there'd be enough majority consumption. It's a really interesting and weird dystopian problem for acquisition on a recommendation system that, to me, proves that you're still always going to have humans in that media creation and curation loop, because there's something magical about content that nobody expected to be awesome, but became really awesome.
Right.
And no amount of Midjourney, Rexus, ChatGPT is going to stumble on the magical thing that is weird that we all somehow
There's
love.
only one Napoleon Dynamite, you can't just generate that out.
It's true.
But yeah, that'll be tough, because I can imagine that if the snake is eating its own tail and what's generated is going back into the system, you won't recognize at NBC until the revenues start changing, until people just aren't buying at the same rate. So you'll have to then, where's the honest problem in this? And there'll always be a human probably needed for that.
But it's also not just the currency problem. I think it is a business problem when it comes to dollars and cents, but there is something deeper and more human about the problem that I believe,
very philosophical.
especially about NBC Universal, that people care about.
Yeah, too philosophical for marketing.
Right.
Okay, you went too far.
Sorry.
I'm just kidding.
You'd be amazed how philosophical marketing
No,
works.
it is actually. I love that. I mean, that's very true. It's a human problem at the end of the day. It's a very
Yeah.
psychological problem.
There's something about the love of a brand, right? ChatGPT is never going to build a relationship with a person. It might write copy that can help you build a relationship. But there's like, it's unheimlich, right? It's like that Freudian moment where you like look at the puppet and you're like, it's a little too real to be good.
Yeah.
To your point, it's the perfect enthymeme of like, on the one hand, on the other hand, synthesis. And you're like, no thanks, I'm good. It's a really great argument, right? Like in its purest form, but you don't like it because it's a perfect argument.
Yeah, and even when I think about the insurance companies too, it's like I still see certain people in my head that like represent that insurance company. Like, it still has to have that human doctor kind of feel,
right?
Even if it's marketing. So.
Well, and the enthymeme argument's not going to work for insurance because we all know what the synthesis of that argument is. You are going to die, right? Like it's not like a magic bullet of like,
but you can die happier,
right?
Like, yeah.
This product will make death like this, and this product will make death like this. So in conclusion, so it's interesting how that might translate.
Yeah. All right. So tell me, what do you think about generative AI?
Yeah. So this is great. I completely agree with all the themes. The future is more personalization at scale. Obviously, I completely agree. It's going to be humans plus AI is the future. And it's funny because, you know, in the hype cycle, you hear a lot of like, oh, GPT is going to take everything over. But anyone who actually works with these systems, it's pretty obvious that there will be new problems, but it hasn't even solved the problems that everyone sort of thought that it had. But what I'd really add to this is I think the future is also customization. And what I mean by that is none of this stuff works out the box, right? So you can't just take ChatGPT, and I've referred to a bunch of different ways in which it does it. But even more interestingly, again, if you actually sort of get your hands dirty with it, what we found is different models do different things better and worse. And as simple as like GPT 3.5 was actually better at writing headlines when like T5 was better at writing descriptions, which is very sort of in the weeds detail, but you got to really actually play with the models and see sort of what they're coming out with. But the broader problem, so you need to customize the infrastructure, you need to understand what models are working. It's not like one model kind of takes over the world. But there's an even broader problem here, which I somewhat mentioned before, which is in a world where this stuff is sort of generalized, how do you differentiate yourself? So if you want to have a brand, you can't just have ChatGPT spit stuff out for you because it's going to spit the same stuff out for everybody. And so how do you actually get these models to, you know, and again, this is another reason why you need a human in the loop, and it addresses personalization, and all of these things are related because this stuff doesn't work out of the box. And you need to differentiate yourself for any really good sort of customer acquisition strategy. And again, if you play around with it on your phone, I do this all the time, and it's very obvious that it's not going to get you where you need to be unless you can start adding some sort of human input or some of the understanding from, you know, the analysis you did to understand what the target audience is, for instance. But it's all going to be about customization because I tend to think of it as like the AI is going to do the grunt work, and now you're still got to do like the clever work on top of it because it's not going to do it for you.
Yeah. All right. So I guess we're down to the last couple of minutes, but is there just like, is there like a talking point any of you love to just share that people are like, whoa, that was so like interesting and informational, especially for people who are trying to acquire more customers? And if not, then we can end early. But I just thought, anything just pops into your head? 3,
So
2, okay, got one.
Yeah, my favorite sort of, the initial mental model I had, I forget who even said it because a lot of people were saying it, was everyone was freaking out in, I don't know what it was, November or whatever, about ChatGPT because it was going to take over. It's really impressive. I'll just say this. I come from like psychology and psycholinguistics. I did not anticipate this, and I think probably all you guys have said, I don't think anyone anticipated LLMs were going to come out as good as they did. But it's not a genius. And my favorite example or sort of mental model is it's like having 1,000 interns, right? So it's good, but it's not going to run your company for you. So that's sort of how I think of this stuff out the box. And then it's up to you to figure out how to customize it to get the most out of those 1,000 interns if you want an actual outcome.
That resonates. I can imagine that tagline on the app. It's like having 1,000 interns. So, all right, thank you guys so much for your time up here. Give them a round of applause. We appreciate you. Thank you guys.